So the benefits of inflation. I've kind of listed two main benefits here. And the first one is one we've already discussed, which this is called seigniorage. And really that's just government revenue from printing or creating money. So government or profit from printing money. Right, so let's say the government prints a $20 bill. They now have $20, right? I can print my fiat currency and say it's worth $20. And I now have $20, and so my profit is the $20 minus the cost to make it, which tends to be relatively low. So, I mean, it does cost something to make the money, but the difference between those is effectively profit for the government. So if the government then takes that profit and uses it to pay down debt, we have the problem potentially of inflation that we talked about previously. So that's one benefit, is that the government has revenue available from printing the money. And if they abuse that power, they end up with hyperinflation, but it's there nonetheless. The second benefit of inflation is that if it's relatively low, it can tend to stimulate economic activity. And this works through a couple of channels. So one is it works in the labor market. So remember that the nominal wage tends to be fixed, especially in the short run. So the nominal wage is rigid or fixed. Doesn't tend to move a lot in the short term. And so if you look at our labor market, so we have the quantity of labor, sorry, I should say, well, this quantity of labor, and we had the wage rate on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis. And so we had some labor supply, and we had labor demand, and labor demand was determined by the value of the marginal product, which was the price times the marginal product of labor. So, if the wage is more or less fixed, and the price level increases, meaning we have inflation, that shifts labor demand to the right. Now, typically, the wage would go up in response to that at roughly equal pace, and that would cause some reduction in the amount of labor. But if the price is fixed, we're going to tend to get a relatively large increase in the amount of labor that firms use because it's relatively cheap. So if the price increases, but nominal wage stays about the same, that means that labor is relatively cheap. So firms can use more. So this tends to be a relatively short-run effect. Eventually, your nominal wages are going to increase at roughly the same rate as inflation. But this can have some stimulating effect on the economy, as we see here, right? We get some additional labor. So the other one has to do with the effect of interest rates. And so basically, when we have inflation, it can tend to cause the real interest rate to decrease. So the real interest rate, remember, was equal to the nominal interest rate minus inflation. This is the real interest rate. And so if the inflation rate goes up and the nominal interest rate doesn't change quite as much, the real interest rate is going to go down. And so the result of the decrease in the real interest rate is that we get more economic activity. So we want to do more consumption, investment, and more engagement in the credit market. So when R goes down, consumption will increase, right? You want to buy more cars and houses, right? To pay some real interest on a house in my mortgage, the lower the real interest rate, the more houses I'm going to want to purchase. And that can stimulate economic activity. And same for firms that want to build a new building and borrow money to do so, or buy new equipment. When the real interest rate is lower, it's cheaper to do that, and they're going to do more of it. So a mild inflation that reduces the real interest rate can stimulate additional economic activity by sort of encouraging consumption and investment spending by firms via the credit market. So those are the benefits to inflation. It's worth noting that these are only going to be true typically when inflation is relatively low. So if inflation gets very high, especially the economic activity aspects, we don't find those to be there for high inflations, which is what I have you kind of look at here in the next learning objective question on Canvas.